The great alien ship moved like a city of metal in the dark sea of space. Its glowing lights burned against the endless black, and its engines hummed with a low, steady sound. Deep inside this ship, where gold pillars touched the high ceilings, and shadows danced across walls, the throne hall was waiting. The air was heavy. Every guard stood straight, their armor shining like glass. Their faces were hidden, but their eyes never moved away from the center of the room. The throne stood tall, carved from silver stone, wrapped in flowing banners of crimson and gold, and upon this throne sat the Empress. She was not human. She was larger, her body wrapped in strong wings like living blades. Her skin glowed faintly, under the hall lights, as if stars themselves lived in her veins. Her crown was not made of jewels, but of burning light, and her eyes carried power enough to crush armies. Yet at that moment her voice cut sharper than her presence. Before her, a man was brought forward. He wore simple clothes stained with oil and dust, and in his hand he held a small mechanic's cap. He was not a warrior. He was not a scholar. He was only a human mechanic, taken from his work and dragged into a world of royalty and fear. The Empress leaned forward, her voice echoing across the hall. "If you teach her to speak again," she shouted, "I will give you everything." The mechanic froze. He looked left and right, unsure if those words were truly meant for him. The guard stepped back, and into the light came a small figure dot. It was a child. She walked slowly, her tiny feet soft against the cold floor. She was no ordinary girl. Her skin glimmered in shades of orange, like the scales of a bright lizard touched by fire. Tiny wings rested on her back, folded neatly, and her large blue eyes glowed with a strange light that pierced the silence. She wore a soft pink dress, clean and delicate, though her expression was not. Her face was quiet, too quiet. The mechanic looked at her. She looked back at him. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. The throne hall, the guards, even the Empress herself, falls seemed to fade, leaving only the man and the child locked in silence. He tried to smile. He raised his cap in a nervous gesture, as if greeting her. The child tilted her head but said nothing. The Empress's voice thundered again. This child once spoke with a voice brighter than stars, but now she is silent. "I command you, human, bring back her voice. If you succeed, no treasure will be beyond your reach. Fail, and you will never leave this ship alive." The mechanic swallowed hard. He had fixed broken engines, repaired heavy doors, and built machines from nothing, but never in his life had he been asked to repair something as fragile as a voice. The child stepped closer. Her glowing eyes studied his face with curiosity. She reached out with one hand, tiny claws peeking from her fingers. She touched his sleeve gently, as if testing to see if he was real. The mechanic felt the weight of her silence more than any sound he had ever heard. Why could she not speak? What had stolen her voice? The hall was tense, as if the walls themselves waited for the answer. Guards shifted but said nothing. The Empress leaned back, her wings spreading wide, her eyes burning with command. The mechanic knew he could not refuse. He bent slightly toward the child, lowering himself to her height. "Hello," he whispered. His voice was soft, almost afraid. The child blinked. Her mouth moved, as if to copy his words, but no sound came out. She closed her lips quickly, looking down in shame. The mechanic's heart ached. He could see it clearly now. This was no curse of laziness. This was not the silence of choice. This was the silence of pain, of something stolen away from her. The Empress's voice cut the air once more. "You have 3 cycles of the stars, 3 turns of our world's light. After that, if she does not speak, you will pay with your life." The mechanic nodded, though his hands trembled. He looked once more at the child. She raised her eyes again, and for the first time, he saw something in them, hope. A strange hope that maybe, just maybe, this human stranger could help her. The hall's doors closed with a heavy crash, and the mechanic was led away, the child following silently beside him. Behind them, the Empress sat in her throne of light, her eyes burning, her command echoing through every corridor of the ship. "If you teach her to speak again, I will give you everything." And thus, the story began with a silent child, a desperate human, and a promise that could change the fate of empires. The mechanic was taken through long corridors that twisted like veins of steel. The ship felt alive, humming with strange power that vibrated under his boots. Every wall was covered with glowing lines, symbols he could not read, pulsing faintly, as if the ship itself was watching him. 2 alien guards walked behind him, their tall frames casting shadows that stretched across the floor. They spoke no words, only the clink of their weapons echoed with each step. The child walked beside him, quiet, as always, her glowing eyes fixed forward. She moved like she belonged to the silence, as if sound had never been part of her world. The mechanic's mind raced. He was just a worker, pulled from machines and wires, thrown into a throne room with a demand no human should ever hear, to teach a child to speak again. And not just any child, but the daughter maybe heir of an alien empress. Failure meant death. Success meant everything. But what did everything mean to him? Gold, freedom, power, none of it mattered if he failed to uncover the truth of the girl's silence. They entered a chamber unlike the others. The doors hissed open, and the mechanic stepped into a room lit by soft blue lights. The walls curved upward like the inside of a giant egg, and the air was warmer here. This was not a cell, nor was it a royal chamber. It was something in between, a place meant for waiting, perhaps for testing. The guards stopped at the door. One turned, its voice metallic behind the helmet. You stay here. 3 cycles of the stars. Fail, and you will not see a 4th. The door sealed shut, leaving the mechanic alone with the child. For the first time, there was no Empress watching, no guards pressing down with their silent threats, only him, the child, and the strange hum of the walls. The mechanic lowered himself to the floor, pulling his cap from his head and placing it beside him. He tried to think like he did with machines. When an engine failed, there was always a reason. Something broken, something missing, something blocked. Voices, too, were like machines. Breath, sound, words all built step by step. He looked at the girl. She sat on the floor opposite him, her tiny wings twitching slightly as if responding to some hidden breeze. She watched him closely, her eyes glowing faintly brighter in the dim room. Can you understand me? He asked gently. She blinked, tilted her head, then nodded. The mechanic's breath caught so she could understand. That was a start. Do you remember speaking before? He tried again. The girl's expression changed. Her eyes darkened, and she shook her head quickly, almost afraid. She curled her small hands into fists and looked away. The mechanic leaned back, his heart heavy. Something was wrong here. This was not just a voice lost to sickness or fear. This was something deeper, heavier, as if her silence was being held in place by invisible chains. He pulled a small tool from his belt, a simple piece of metal shaped for fixing broken wires. Slowly he tapped it against the floor. Clink, clink, clink. The girl's head turned, her eyes fixed on the sound. He tapped again, then raised the tool to his mouth. Tap, 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 he said softly, speaking the sound out loud. The girl blinked. For the first time, her lips parted, just slightly. She did not speak, but she tried to shape the sound with her mouth. Nothing came out. She shut her lips quickly, ashamed, her wings folding tighter against her back. The mechanic felt his chest tighten. This was not failure. This was progress. She wanted to try. You're not broken, he whispered. Someone took your voice. But we'll find it again. The child looked at him, and though she said nothing, her eyes glimmered with something he had not seen before. Hope, fragile but real. The lights in the room flickered suddenly. The mechanic froze. The hum of the walls grew louder, then softer, as if the ship itself had sighed. The child's eyes darted upward, fear flashing across her face. Does this happen often? He asked softly. She shook her head. A shadow passed across the wall, though no one was there. The mechanic frowned. He had worked inside engines long enough to know when something moved in secret. Someone or something was watching them. He stood, running his hand along the glowing lines carved into the wall. The symbols shifted faintly under his touch, rearranging like living script. He pulled his hand back quickly. The girl hugged her knees, staring at him as if warning him not to touch the walls again. The mechanic sat back down. Whoever controlled this ship had eyes everywhere. Maybe her silence wasn't just from trauma. Maybe it was enforced. Maybe someone wanted her quiet forever. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They don't want you to speak, do they? The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the door nervously, then back at him. Her lips parted again, a faint, soundless gasp. Tears welled at the edge of her glowing eyes, and she shook her head desperate, as if begging him not to ask more. The mechanic reached for his cap, holding it out to her like he had in the throne room. A small gesture, but simple, human, safe. She hesitated, then touched the cap with her claws, dragging it closer to herself. She held it gently, pressing it against her dress. For the first time, her shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. The mechanic smiled faintly. Trust it was the first tool he needed, and maybe the strongest. But as the lights flickered once more, and a whisper ran along the walls like a voice too quiet to hear, he knew one thing with certainty. This was not just about teaching a child to speak. This was about uncovering a secret buried so deep, even the Empress feared it. and in that moment, the mechanic understood the weight of her promise. Everything had a price. The mechanic woke to the low hum of the alien chamber. He had not meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had taken him quickly. When his eyes opened, the child was sitting across from him, still holding his cap, still silent. Her glowing eyes were fixed on him as though she had never stopped watching. He rubbed his face, then looked around. The walls of the room pulsed with faint light, steady now, not flickering as they had the night before. Whoever had been watching was quiet for the moment. That silence, however, only made his skin crawl more. The mechanic stood and stretched. He pulled a small device from his belt, a scrap of machinery he had carried since his capture. It was nothing fancy, just a sound emitter he once used for testing vibrations in engine coils. He turned it on, and a sharp beep rang through the chamber. The child's eyes widened. She tilted her head, leaning closer. The mechanic smiled softly. Sound, he whispered. Voice begins with sound. He pressed the button again. Beep dot. Then he pointed at his mouth. Beep. The child's lips parted slightly. Her throat moved, but no sound escaped. She shut her mouth quickly, lowering her head. The mechanic crouched down, keeping his voice gentle. It's all right. Don't be afraid. He pressed the button again. Beep. This time he drew the sound out with his own voice. Beep. The girl raised her eyes again. Her lips shaped the sound silently, her wings twitching against her back. Good, he said softly. You're trying, that's enough. For the next hour, he played simple tones, repeating them slowly, patiently. Sometimes she copied with her lips, sometimes she only watched, but every time she grew bolder. Her silence no longer felt like refusal, it was more like a locked door, and with each sound, she pressed harder against it. But then the door hissed open. 2 guards entered, their tall frames filling the chamber. They did not speak. Their glowing weapons hummed faintly, a reminder of how fragile the mechanic's life was. One of them stepped forward, pointing at the device in his hand. You are not permitted to use human tools without approval, the guard said in a flat voice. The mechanic's jaw tightened. How do you expect me to teach without tools? The guard's helmet tilted slightly, as if considering him. You are here to obey the Empress, nothing more. Before the mechanic could respond, the child moved. She hugged the cap tighter, and stepped in front of him, her small frame shaking but her eyes glowing fiercely. She made no sound, but her defiance was clear. The guards exchanged a look. One raised his hand, but the other stopped him. After a long pause, they backed away. You will be watched, one said before the door sealed shut again. The mechanic let out a slow breath. He crouched beside the child. Thank you, he whispered. She lowered her head shyly, but her wings fluttered faintly as if proud. Past he kept working, showing her shapes with his mouth, guiding her hand to feel the vibrations in his throat when he spoke. She mimicked her small fingers trembling against his skin. Once, for a heartbeat, he thought he heard the faintest gasp escape her lips. Not a word, not yet, but sound. His chest tightened with hope, but as the room grew darker, the hum of the walls changed again. The lights pulsed too fast, like a heartbeat in panic. The mechanic stood, scanning the walls. They're watching us again, he muttered. Their child's wings folded tight. She curled into herself, clutching the cap. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, fear shining in them. Why don't they want you to speak? The mechanic whispered. He crouched, looking at her. What are they so afraid of? The girl shook her head quickly, pressing her lips shut. Tears welled in her glowing eyes, and she clung to the cap as though it were the only thing keeping her safe. The mechanic's throat tightened. He wanted to press her, to demand answers, but he stopped. She was terrified. Whatever truth her voice carried, it was dangerous enough to keep her silenced by force. Instead, he tried something different. He drew a small circle on the floor with a piece of broken metal, then another, and another, until he had made a pattern. He pointed at the circles, tapping each with his tool. Clink, clink, clink. The girl's fear eased slightly. She crawled closer, touching the circles with her claws. She tapped them herself, copying the rhythm. For the first time, she smiled faintly, her eyes lighting with joy. The mechanic chuckled, softly. That's it. We'll make our own language until we find your voice again. The moment was fragile, delicate, but it was progress. Suddenly, a low alarm echoed through the walls. Red lights flared, casting long shadows. The mechanic froze. The girl clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide. The door hissed open again, but this time no guards stepped inside. Only a voice echoed through the hall, deep and full of fury. You are meddling where you should not. Human, leave the child's silence untouched, or you will share it forever. The mechanic felt his stomach drop. He looked down at the girl. She was trembling, her glowing eyes filled with terror. She buried her face against his chest. her tiny hands clutching his shirt. He wrapped an arm around her, glaring at the walls. Whoever spoke was not the Empress. This was someone else, hidden, powerful, and afraid of what the child might reveal. The mechanic clenched his jaw. No, he whispered to himself. I won't stop. She deserves her voice. The lights flickered. Once more, then steadied. The voice was gone. The mechanic looked down at the child. Her face was streaked with silent tears, but in her eyes he saw something new. Not just fear, not just hope, trust. And with that trust he knew one thing. His first attempt was working. He would not give up. Not now. Not ever. The ship never truly slept, even in the deepest hours of its cycle, when most lights dimmed and the halls quieted. The endless hum of its engines pressed against the walls like a heartbeat too large to ignore. The mechanic lay awake, staring at the curved ceiling of his chamber. Every flicker of light, every shift in the ship's tone made him wonder who was listening, who was waiting in the shadows. The child slept nearby, curled into a corner with his cap clutched against her chest. Her small wings twitched softly as if caught in dreams. She looked peaceful for once, but her silence still cut through him like a blade. Somewhere in that stillness was a secret too dangerous for words. Somewhere in her lost voice was the reason the Empress had turned to a human stranger instead of her own people. The mechanic's eyes closed for only a moment before a faint sound snapped them open again. It was not the hum of the engines, nor the hiss of the doors. It was softer, almost like a whisper sliding across the walls. He sat up, straining to hear. Leave the child. Leave her silence untouched. The same voice from before. The mechanic's jaw tightened. He rose slowly, careful not to wake the girl, and pressed his ear to the wall. The symbols carved into the surface glowed faintly, rearranging themselves into patterns he could not understand. He tapped the wall lightly with his fingers. At once, the whisper cut off. Silence. He pulled back, unsettled. Whoever was behind the voice, they were watching closely, and they were afraid. That meant he was on the right path. The next cycle began, with guards escorting him and the child to a larger chamber. This one was different, an observation hall. Rows of alien scribes sat behind a glass barrier, their hands busy writing symbols that glowed as they touched the surface. The Empress herself was not there, but her presence lingered in the banners that hung from the ceiling. One of the guards spoke. Teach here. She must be seen. The mechanic hated it. He felt like an animal forced into a cage, his every move studied. Still, he had no choice. He looked down at the girl. Her eyes darted nervously at the glass wall, but when she looked back at him, she clutched the cap tighter, as though reminding herself she was not alone. He crouched to her level. Ignore them, he whispered. It's just us. Remember yesterday. We'll try again. The child nodded faintly. He began with the sound device, letting it chirp a soft beep. The girl's lips moved in silent mimicry. Then he guided her hand to his throat once more, showing her the vibrations of his voice. Ba-ba. Her throat moved, struggling to copy him. No sound came, but her lips formed the shape, with more confidence now. The scribes behind the glass scribbled faster, their glowing symbols multiplying. The mechanic's stomach turned. Every tiny movement, every attempt she made, was being recorded. For what? Study, judgment, or something worse? He pushed the thought aside. Progress mattered more. Hours passed in the same rhythm, sound, mimic, silence. Again and again, until sweat lined his forehead and the child's eyes grew heavy with effort. Then it happened. A faint breath escaped her throat. It was not a word. It was not even a letter. But it was sound. Real, raw sound. The mechanic froze. The scribes leaned forward. The girl gasped, startled by her own voice, then quickly covered her mouth with her hands. Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head, terrified. The mechanic reached for her. Gently. No, it's good. That was you. That was your voice. She trembled but lowered her hands slowly. Behind the glass, the scribes whispered fiercely to each other. Their glowing pens scratched faster, their eyes never leaving the girl. The mechanic saw something there. Fear. Not excitement, not curiosity. Fear. The door opened suddenly, and a figure stepped inside. Not the Empress, another alien, tall and draped in black armor. His presence filled the room with cold air. He spoke in a voice the mechanic recognized. Instantly, the same voice that had whispered through the walls. She must not speak. The guard stiffened but did not move. The black-armored figure strode closer, his eyes burning like coals. Her silence protects us all. If you break it, human, you will destroy more than your own life. The mechanic stood his ground. She has a right to her voice. The figure's gaze shifted to the child, who shrank back, clutching the cap once more. For a long moment, the hall was still. Then the figure leaned close to the mechanic. Do you know what she holds inside her words? Do you know why even the Empress fears her silence? The mechanic said nothing, but inside his chest, his heart hammered. The figure straightened. You will regret opening that door. He turned and left, the doors hissing shut behind him. The scribes behind the glass scattered quickly, fear written across their movements. The guards ushered the mechanic and the child back toward their chamber. No one spoke a word. Inside the quiet room again, the child crawled into her corner, clutching the cap tightly. The mechanic sat beside her, mind racing. Whoever that figure was, he held power enough to silence even the Empress's court. And if he was this desperate to keep the girl quiet, then her voice was worth more than treasure. He looked at her trembling form and whispered, "They're afraid of you. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong. We'll find out why." The child lifted her head, tears shining in her glowing eyes. She made a soft movement with her lips, as if trying again. No sound came, but determination flickered. And in that moment, the mechanic knew. Their enemy was no curse, no sickness. It was something alive, something hidden. And whatever secret the child carried, it was powerful enough to shake an empire. The mechanic could not sleep. The image of the black-armored figure haunted him, the warning echoing in his skull. She must not speak. The words carried a weight heavier than steel. Why would anyone fear the voice of a child? What truth could hide inside something so small? The girl was curled beside him, holding his cap like it was treasure. Her wings twitched in restless dreams, and her lips moved silently, as if trying to form words even in sleep. He watched her, wondering if somewhere in her dreams her voice was alive again, free from the chains that bound it here. When the lights of the next cycle glowed across the walls, the mechanic decided he would not waste another moment. If others wanted her silent, then every attempt mattered even more. He rose, rummaged through scraps the guards had not taken, and began building. His hands moved with memory, shaping small pieces of metal into a device. Not an engine, not a weapon, something simpler. The girl woke to the soft clinking of his tools. She blinked, rubbed her glowing eyes, and crawled closer. He smiled faintly. "I'm making something for you," he said. She tilted her head, curious. The mechanic finished, shaping the device, a thin tube with a small chamber at the center. He pressed it to his lips and blew. A soft, clear tone filled the room, a simple whistle. The sound was pure, clean, like a bird singing in the distance. The child's eyes widened. She leaned forward, wings quivering. The mechanic held the whistle out to her. "Here, try." She hesitated, but took it in her small hands. She pressed it to her lips and blew gently. At first, nothing. Then she tried again, harder. A faint, shaky tone spilled into the room. Her eyes lit up. She gasped, then blew again, louder this time. The sound rang clear. For the first time, she laughed not with voice, but with her face. Her glowing eyes shone, her small body trembling with excitement. The whistle sang again and again, each note a tiny victory. The mechanic chuckled softly. "That's it. That's sound. You're making sound again." The girl hugged the whistle, tightly, then slowly. She pressed it to her lips once more, but instead of blowing, she tried to copy with her throat. A faint rasp escaped her mouth. Rough, broken but sound. The mechanic's heart leaped. He crouched close, nodding. "Yes, do it again." She tried once more. The rasp came clearer, shaping the start of a note. She pressed a hand to her own throat, feeling the vibration like he had shown her before. Her eyes widened in wonder. Tears stung the mechanic's eyes. She was breaking through. The silence was cracking, but the joy did not last long. The lights flickered violently, plunging the chamber into a storm of shadows and red glow. A deep hum filled the walls. Angry, alive. The girl froze, clutching the whistle to her chest. A voice hissed through the chamber. Not the Empress, not the guards, the same voice as before, sharp as broken glass. "You are opening what must remain closed. Stop, human. Stop, or you will doom us all." The mechanic stood, fury burning through him. "You can't keep her silent forever. She has a right to speak." The walls pulsed brighter. The voice grew colder. "Her words are not her own. They carry the memory of 1,000 secrets. If she speaks, your Empress will fall. Your people will burn. You will not understand until it is too late." The girl buried her face in his sleeve, trembling. The mechanic wrapped an arm around her, glaring at the walls. "Then let it be too late. She's not your prisoner, not anymore." Silence fell. The lights steadied. The hum faded. The mechanic looked down at the child. She was shaking, tears glowing in her eyes. He wiped them gently. "Don't listen to them," he whispered. "Your voice is yours. no one else's. The girl stared at him for a long moment. Then, with trembling lips, she tried again. A sound broken, but real escaped her throat. It was almost a word. Not clear, but close. The mechanic froze, holding his breath. He leaned in, waiting. Her lips shaped it again. A faint syllable pushed. Free, weak but alive. The guards burst through the door. They had heard it too. Their weapons glowed, their eyes wide with shock. One dropped to his knees, muttering words in a language the mechanic could not understand. The child gasped, frightened. She clung to the mechanic, hiding her face. He held her close, shielding her with his body. "What's happening?" he demanded. The guards did not answer. They looked terrified, not of him, not of the girl, but of what they had just heard. One whispered, "The prophecy begins." Before the mechanic could ask more, the guards retreated, sealing the door once again. The girl looked up at him, tears streaking down her cheeks. She opened her mouth, trembling, and tried one more time. The sound that came out was fragile, broken, but unmistakable. A single word. It was his name. The mechanic's heart stopped. She had never been told his name. He had never spoken it aloud, yet she said it, clear enough to pierce the silence like a blade. He stared at her, stunned, his chest tight with both fear and wonder. How did she know? How could she know? The girl's eyes glowed brighter, and in them he saw something vast, something ancient. Her voice was not just returning, it was waking. And whatever truth came with it, the Empire was not ready. The chamber felt different after that word. It hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to erase. The mechanic stood frozen, his ears ringing, his mind reeling. She had spoken his name, a word she had never been told, but child stared up at him, frightened by what she had done, clutching the whistle tightly in her small hands. Her glowing eyes shimmered as if stars themselves were trapped inside them. For a long trembling moment, the mechanic could not move. Then the ship itself seemed to react. The walls shuddered with a low hum. Symbols along the ceiling lit one by one, cascading like fire across the room. The floor vibrated beneath them. It was as though the sound of her voice had woken something ancient inside the vessel. The door slammed open. Guards rushed in, but they did not raise their weapons. Their faces, what could be seen of them beneath their helmets, were pale, almost fearful. One knelt instantly, lowering his head to the child. The other whispered a word the mechanic could not understand, but the reverence in his tone was unmistakable. The girl pressed closer to the mechanic, hiding her face against his chest. "What's going on?" the human demanded, his voice sharp. "What does this mean?" The guards did not answer him. Instead, they backed out of the room and slammed the door shut once more, locking the two of them inside. The mechanic felt his heart pound. Something had shifted. Not just in the girl, not just in him, but in the Empire itself. The silence that had been forced on her was breaking, and with it came something powerful, something dangerous. He crouched, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You knew my name," he whispered. The child blinked, tears welling in her glowing eyes. Her lips moved slowly. She tried again. The sound cracked and rasped, but the syllables were clear enough. "Me, Chan Icy." He felt his throat tighten. She was learning, yes, but this was more than memory or mimicry. This was knowledge, pulled from somewhere deeper. She was not just speaking. She was remembering. The lights flickered violently, plunging the chamber into alternating shadows and brightness. A voice rose again, echoing through the walls. Not the black armored figure this time. This voice was different, colder, filled with despair. "You fool, you have undone the seal. Do you not understand what she carries?" The mechanic spun toward the wall, fists clenched. "I don't care what you say. She deserves her voice." The voice thundered in reply. "Her voice is not hers alone. It is the memory of our empire, the knowledge of every betrayal, every hidden truth. She is a vessel. If she speaks fully, the Empress will fall, and with her, every throne across the stars." The mechanic froze, his stomach dropping. He looked down at the girl. She clutched the whistle tighter, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered another sound, almost inaudible, "True." The walls shook as if the ship itself recoiled from her word. The mechanic held her closer, his mind racing. If what the voice claimed was true, then her silence had been a prison built not for her sake, but for the Empire's survival. Her words could reveal secrets buried for generations, perhaps topple rulers, perhaps burn dynasties to ash. But as he looked at her trembling form, her small hands gripping his sleeve, he knew the choice had already been made. Whatever truth lived inside her, it belonged to her, not to the Empress, not to the guards, not to the Empire. The door opened again, but this time it was not guards who entered. It was the Empress herself. Her wings spread wide, filling the chamber with radiant light. Her crown burned brighter than ever, her gaze sharp enough to cut steel. She looked at the girl, then at the mechanic, her expression unreadable. Has spoken. The mechanic swallowed hard. Yes. The Empress's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. What word? The child pressed into the mechanic's chest. She did not answer. The mechanic met the Empress's gaze. My name. The Empress studied him for a long, tense moment. Then, to his surprise, she did not strike him down. Instead, she let out a slow, shaking breath. It begins, she whispered. Mechanic frowned. What begins? The Empress's wings curled tighter around her body, as if shielding herself from unseen eyes. The truth we tried to bury. The truth that child carries inside her voice. The girl looked up, trembling, her lips parting again. Another sound slipped free, clearer than before. A single word in her alien tongue. The Empress staggered back as though struck. The mechanic caught her reaction. What did she say? The Empress's face hardened. She spoke a name, the name of the traitor who destroyed our homeworld's heart. A name forbidden in this empire. The mechanic felt the girl grip his arm tighter, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. She whispered again, repeating the forbidden name. Each syllable stronger, sharper. The Empress trembled with rage and fear. If she speaks it fully before the court, the empire will know the truth. My throne will collapse. My enemies will rise. Do you understand what you have done, human? The mechanic did not flinch. He placed a hand on the child's back, steady and firm. I gave her back what was stolen. That's all I did. The Empress stared at him, her jaw clenched, her wings trembling. Then, slowly, her voice broke into a whisper. Perhaps that is everything. The chamber fell silent again, but the silence no longer felt empty. It was heavy, trembling, alive. The child's voice had begun to wake, and with it came a storm none of them could escape. The throne hall shook as though the ship itself felt the weight of what had been spoken. The Empress stood at the center, her wings unfurled in fury, her eyes burning with light that made the guards bow their heads in fear. Across from her, the mechanic held the child tightly, refusing to let her go. The girl's lips still trembled with words. Each one came stronger than the last, though her voice cracked with effort. The forbidden name hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Every alien in the hall looked terrified, but none dared to silence her. The Empress raised her hand. The hall froze. Enough, she commanded, her voice shaking the very walls. Her gaze fell upon the mechanic. You have brought her voice back, but you do not understand what that means. Speak further, and our empire collapses. The mechanic met her gaze, his jaw tight. You promised me everything if I taught her to speak again. I did. Now you face the truth you've hidden. The child clung to him, her small frame shaking, but her eyes glowed like twin stars. She looked at the Empress with no fear now, only sorrow. Her lips parted again. A single phrase in her alien tongue flowed out, clear and unbroken. The Empress staggered back as though struck by a weapon. The hall filled with gasps. The scribes dropped their glowing tablets. The guards stepped away in confusion. The mechanic looked down at the girl. What did she say? The Empress's voice broke, heavy with grief. She said, I remember everything. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was the silence of revelation, of secrets tearing free from the shadows. The Empress lowered her head, her wings curling around her like a shroud. You do not know what you've done, human. Her voice carries the memories of our bloodline. Every betrayal, every crime, every sin we buried. If she speaks at all, the empire will tear itself apart. The mechanic held the child closer than maybe it should. Gasps rippled through the hall. No one spoke to the Empress that way. But the Empress did not strike him. She only stared, her eyes filled with centuries of weight. The girl stepped forward slowly. Pulling herself from the mechanic's arms, she held the cap tightly in her claws, pressing it against her chest like a shield. Then she turned to the throne and began to speak again. Her words were broken but steady. She spoke of a traitor's name, of a war buried in silence, of the Empress's own council betraying their people, sacrificing worlds to keep their throne. Each word cracked like thunder, shaking the foundation of the empire. The guards fell to their knees. The scribes covered their faces. The hall trembled as if the ship itself rebelled against the weight of truth. The Empress clutched the edge of her throne, her wings trembling. Tears glimmered in her burning eyes. For the first time, she looked less like a goddess of fire and more like a woman carrying unbearable pain. Stop, she whispered. But the girl did not stop. Her voice grew stronger with every word, as though each syllable unlocked the chains that had bound her. Her glowing eyes shone brighter, her wings twitching as if ready to open wide. She spoke not like a child but like an ancient voice reborn, echoing across the chamber, unstoppable. The mechanic stood beside her, steady, silent, his heart pounding. He knew now that she was more than a child. She was the Empire's memory, its living archive, a vessel of truth no chains could hold forever. Finally, when her strength began to fade, the girl fell silent. The hall shook one last time, then grew still. Every eye turned to the Empress. She rose slowly, her crown dimming, her wings folding tight. She stepped forward, towering over the mechanic and the child. For a moment the air burned with tension. Then, she knelt. Gasps filled the hall. The Empress of the Stars, bending her knee, she reached out and touched the child's face gently. "You carry the burden of my line," she said softly. "And yet, you carried it in silence for too long. Your voice is yours again, let it be heard." The mechanic's chest tightened. He had never expected this. The Empress rose and turned to him. Her voice carried both grief and respect. "Human, you have done what none of my people could. You gave her back her truth. I promised you everything. Name what you wish, and it shall be yours." The hall fell silent, waiting. The mechanic thought of riches, of power, of ships and freedom. But when he looked at the child, still holding his cap, her glowing eyes shining with fragile hope, he knew his answer. "I don't want gold. I don't want power," he said firmly. "Give her freedom. Give her a life where no one can steal her voice again." The Empress studied him, her gaze sharp, but then she nodded slowly. "So it shall be." She raised her wings high, her voice booming across the hall. "Let it be known, the child's silence is broken. Her truth is the truth of the Empire. No one shall chain her again." The hall erupted in cries, some of rage, some of awe, but none dared defy her command. The mechanic placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. She looked up at him, her lips moving again. This time her voice was steady, fragile, but beautiful. "Thank you," the mechanic smiled. "No, thank you." And as the halls of the Empire echoed with the sound of her new voice, the promise of silence was broken forever.